Hello, I'm Ayako Onzo from Japan. I'd like to thank my collaborators and the organizers of this conference for allowing me to present this work. Well, I am a neuroscientist and have studied humans' emotions. And at the same time, I am a daughter of these parents. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2015 at the age of 65. She died last year at the age of 72. I had lived with her for 43 years, fortunately. As a neuroscientist, I have read many scientific papers that suggest that personality changes might occur in Alzheimer's disease. For example, they say neuroticism increases after the diagnosis. In contrast, openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, and agreeableness decrease after the diagnosis. That means people with Alzheimer's disease might become more anxious and sometimes even delusional, and they might also become less curious, less extrovert, and so on and so on. And several studies have shown that people with Alzheimer's disease might have difficulty in expressing themselves. But having lived with my mother all my life and observing her for 8 years after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I feel that she remained my mother. She was she even after the diagnosis. She was she until the end. Now that she is gone, when I think of her, she was always the one who smiled this way. Now, even after the diagnosis of severe AD, my mother had shown rich emotions in our house. She always tried to look after me. Researchers have focused on brain areas which are damaged with dementia. For example, in Alzheimer's disease case, um, many people have the hippocampal damage, and they sometimes say they have difficulty in remembering things. But what about brain regions outside the hippocampus? Which parts of the brain remain relatively intact when Alzheimer's disease progresses? These are my mother's brain. The left one is when she was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The right one is when she was diagnosed with severe Alzheimer's disease. Can you see any differences? Well, some of the grooves in the brain have deepened, but the brain is the brain, and the backside of the brain looks relatively intact even in this stage. So, with the help of researchers in Tohoku University in Japan, we calculated the speed of atrophy in my mother's brain. Compared with people without dementia, this part looks green, meaning intact. Well, my mother was a musician, and this part is known to be related with musicianship. And so this result suggests that musical abilities is not affected by Alzheimer's disease in my mother's brain. And surprisingly, there are lot of green areas, meaning intact areas. One of which was dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPFC. This part can be regarded as it's the seat of human intelligence, because this part is known to be related with IQ, for example, but this part, this high cognitive area was preserved. So the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex might be related to the human will to live, using all of each person's remaining abilities. My experience of observing my mother for 8 years like this has led me to believe that even when dementia becomes severe, various abilities and emotions remain. So this time I decided to research what emotions remain in people with dementia other than my mother. Designing for dementia has created an information database in Japan that provides stories told by people with dementia. This is a great work. And they have interviewed over 100 people with dementia, each lasting between 60 and 90 minutes. They asked people with dementia about a range of subjects, from the difficulty they have in their lives to their hopes for the future. And they gave me the transcripts of interviews with 88 people with dementia from 2019 to 2020. And these were people who had been diagnosed with dementia for 4.88 years. 67% of them was has Alzheimer's disease, but in this study, in this analysis, we didn't distinguish between types of dementia. And they were living with this condition for 6.58 years since they started to feel anxious about themselves. What we did is very simple. We assessed what emotions each person with dementia expressed during the interview. 13 subjects without dementia were asked to read the entire transcript of each person's 60 to 90 minutes interview and rate on a 5-point scale how strongly anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise were expressed in it. To our surprise, happiness was the strongest emotion in the interview. So even though the interviewees mentioned difficulties in their lives, what the 13 subjects who read the transcript sensed from the interviews were happy emotions. To find out from what sources they perceived happiness, we asked the 13 subjects to extract the most memorable conversations from the interviews, which are classified into approximately 20 categories. And the most frequent categories were these. The most frequent category was a self-justification, optimism, and humor that people with dementia use in the interview. So the subject who read the transcript were moved by the humor with which people with dementia expressed their condition and their acceptance that they had no choice and that this was all right. And the second most frequent category was the joy of meeting people. The subjects were moved by the fact that people with dementia felt great joy when they met someone in the same situation as them for the first time and often talked about how it had changed their lives. And another interesting category was the joy from recalling episodic memories of the past. Many people were happy to talk about their old memories, which seemed to give people with dementia a sense of happiness and the strength to live. Those who had been diagnosed with dementia for 4.88 years showed the strongest feeling of happiness among the basic emotions in the interviews and appeared to have complex cognitive processing to find happiness in their lives. We surveyed the general public in Japan about the emotions that people with dementia usually feel. Concretely speaking, we asked the general public in Japan without dementia this question: how strongly do you think people with dementia have these emotions in their lives? Fear was the strongest. Happiness was weakest. So, unlike the reality of people with dementia, the general public imagined that people with dementia lived with a strong sense of fear. Finally, we asked the general public this question: how strongly do you think people without dementia have these emotions in their lives. They say happiness must be the strongest. So, people with dementia lived their lives with the highest sense of happiness, just like people without dementia. No matter how advanced the dementia is, not all of their cognitive abilities decline. Their happiness might be coming from their cognitive efforts. Many of the people with dementia were able to devise their own lives and express their distress with humor. Remembering the past brings happy feelings and helps the person. Repeatedly talking about the past may be a necessary part of living. Meeting people seemed to be more important than anything else. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please contact me via this email. Thank you.